Hello everybody, and welcome back to my very own, my Creepypasta FanFiction, A Crystal in the Ruff, on my pad. Anyway, this is my own Creepypasta, and thank you. As you can see from the title, we're about to get into some very interesting stuff, and I think this might be a short chapter, but we'll see. Chapter 9, The Picture Above Doesn't Belong to Me. So all rights to owner. Crystal was going about her business on her computer one Saturday morning, just browsing through the internet, thinking about maybe some online games to play. It was Saturday. So she didn't really have work until much later, and basically had finished up all her homework the day before. She was just thinking about what she might be able to get on when Zach come in the window, and pretty fast too. Crystal smiled as she put the laptop off to the side and hopped off the bed. Crystal walked over to Zach, and he hadn't even looked at her when he had flown into the room straight to the desk. Crystal let her smile fall as she saw him standing next to Zach, that he wasn't exactly acting right. "Hey," Crystal said, trying to be kind but not too worried. "Is everything okay?" she asked when he still hadn't acknowledged her. "Yeah. Yeah." Said Zach, sounding and looking fidgety as hell, still not turning to look at her, just continuing to ruffling through papers. Crystal couldn't help that he wasn't acting like himself at all. Zach never looked this scatterbrained or nervous before. She laid a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" Crystal worried now. He just shook her hand off gently. "Oh, nothing. No, nothing. It's nothing. Everything's fine," he said, sounding like he almost trying to convince himself more than her. Nervousness coated his entire voice. Crystal could only stand there beside him, not saying anything, but feeling like he was hiding something from her. Something bad from her. After a few seconds, Zach stopped ruffling through the papers, turned around her, and looked at her. "Look, it's going to be fine," he told her gently, grabbing both of her shoulders and looking at her fully. "There's just some stuff that I need to figure out. It's going to be okay, but I'm going to need you to keep your nose clean and do as you're told. Okay, love?" he said, sounding somewhat in control, but worried definitely was under the surface. Crystal nodded, and she looked at him. "What do you need to figure out? What's worrying you, Zach?" she asked, trying to sound concerned, but not too pushy. Zach let go of her shoulders. "It's just, there's been some family members in this area that ain't being careful enough, and are going to be a little stronger on their killings spree than it are going a little stronger on their killing sprees than they need to," Zach said, sounding fidgety again. "Not to mention, there's a rumor that he may be visiting these parts recently," said, sounding like he didn't want to tell her this at all. Crystal, is killing more than usual dangerous? Who's he?" Zach tensed, like he really didn't want to answer anymore, but gave her an answer. "No. No. Some of the family has been known to get carried away from time to time, although it does create more work for proxy. It's not uncommon for things like this to happen." Crystal nodded, though she really didn't like the idea of killing any people, but she didn't want to anger Zach. She said nothing about it much. "So what's the thing about this? What's gotten you so worried?" Zach looked like he didn't want to answer the question, but did anyway. But why didn't Crystal didn't know. It's not as though he didn't have the power to say, "It's none of your business," but he seemed to have changed since the last time he told her off. Why, Crystal didn't know. It wouldn't have been a problem before, but with you being in the area, and them not knowing about you makes you kind of fair game. Crystal nodded, trying not to look scared, but secretly she was deadly scared. Not to mention the he I'm referring to is Slenderman. Crystal gasped and froze in place, struggling to talk. She'd managed to speak out. "And that's a problem because..." Zach grabbed her shoulder again. Well, he kinda doesn't know about you being my proxy, and technically we're not even supposed to have proxies or assistants of our own. He finished, sounding sheepily. So knowing about you can make you a target, which is why I'm been hoping to avoid telling the family for as long as possible. However, it's looking more and more like I'm beginning to have not much of a choice. Crystal was shaking now. You mean that if they knew about me, I could die? She stared at Zach, horrified. Not necessarily, no. The family doesn't really like killing in that way unless it's absolutely necessary for the most part, he said, rubbing her hands up and down her shoulder. Sorry, I had to take a drink. My throat was hurting. Um, Not necessarily, no, but the family doesn't like killing in that way unless absolutely necessary for the most part, rubbing his shoulder. But Slenderman could erase your memories, wiping your mind clean, so it would have been as though you've never met me. Crystal nodded, warily, but not feeling assured as she wished. But who can blame her? But then she whipped her head up to Zack, giving him a blunt, questioning look. Why did he care? Didn't he technically say he was going to kill her? And why did her getting her mind wiped mean such a bad thing for him? Zack seemed to catch on to her questioning look. I mean, that wouldn't be good with you being my proxy and all, to have your memories erased, he said, sounding fidgety and panicky and scattery. I mean, I'd have to teach you everything all over again, and you're really annoying and not getting things straight, and it's not like I get a thrill spending time teaching you everything I know. Crystal nodded, but she could tell he wasn't telling the truth, so she suppressed a smile. Zack was still worried, having to let go of her. Zack still looked worried, having to let go of her shoulders, and took a step back. I mean, I'm a proxy of the Great Slenderman. I don't need to be spending the day with a little girl who's naive enough to let me come into her life and teach her all the things that I know and give me something else to look forward to every day because of something or other. Crystal nodded and then held up her hands. Okay, I believe you. She didn't really believe that. But if we really need to get back to we really need to get to the problem at hand, Zack. Crystal told him, trying to regain control of her own emotions on top of helping Zack control his. You said that Slenderman had been seen in this area. What does that mean for us? And why is he here? Zack calming down, trying to focus on something. Zack started straightening out something. The Slenderman likes to comb areas where his family members spend too much time in one, checking to make sure that things are being cleaned and covered up properly, and two, to see what all the fuss is about in case he needs to intervene. Crystal let that sink in for a moment. You don't think the recent surges in killing has to do with them and maybe knowing about us, do you? Zack shook his head. No, believe me, if the family knew, they wouldn't be too shy in letting me know about it. He said ominously. Crystal nodded. So what do we do? What are you going to do? Zack put his head down, sighed, and rubbed his back. I'm going to have to tell them myself. They're not totally unreasonable, and I might be able to talk to Slenderman and negotiate something. Crystal was now really worried now. Is that wise? I mean, you just said that it could make me a target and stuff. Zack said, it's better than them finding out the hard way. Seeing that I lied to them. That really does make us a target. Zack said, sounded like he was remembering something. The family doesn't like being lied to. Krista was still scared, but nodded, knowing if anybody knew the right way to handle this family, it was Zack. But she didn't like it. I need to go. The longer I put this off, the worse the results will be. Crystal nodded warily, not feeling assured of having anything to say. Nothing about this felt good. But what did she expect when it came to Zack? Nothing ever seemed easy. Zack was climbing out the window and watching him go, wishing he wasn't. What if she never saw him again? When Zack stopped and tensed up, Crystal stood there for a moment, wondering what could be wrong. When Zack muttered something under his breath, he pushed away from the window and back into. He pushed away from the window and back into the bedroom. "Oh, fuck the rules for a second," he said, quickly turning around, and before Crystal could say anything, he grabbed her face and pulled close to her face, pressing his lips to hers. Crystal was shocked, but as Zach began to kiss her with such hunger, she found herself closing her eyes and responding to him with hungrier kisses. Both of them kissing each other like they were starving, as if they didn't just take this moment and get it, it would be the death of both of them. Zach hesitated and started to pull back. Crystal didn't want him to. She grabbed his face and continued to kiss him, but she could feel Zach smiling underneath her lips. As he grabbed both her hands and gently put them down, and gently put them away, pulling from the kiss. He was still smiling when she opened her eyes again. Zach put her hands on his chest and said, "I'm glad it was good for you, as good for you as it was for me," sounding out of breath. Crystal laughed. "I'm sorry." Feeling ashamed now. "Don't be. I'm glad. With everything that's happened, it's good to see that you do something you want for once." He then stepped closer to her, still holding her hands, and he thought he was going to kiss her again, but he just touched the top of his head to her, standing there for a moment. Why did that have to happen like this, Crystal? Crystal couldn't answer him. He just continued. "You were just supposed to be a proxy and just something to have fun with. Why did this happen? Why so suddenly?" Crystal couldn't answer. She didn't know either. This stuff just didn't seem real enough to be happening so fast. But it was real. Or to any of them. But Crystal decided the one that decided that the one to them decided one an answer wasn't needed. Zach pulled back. Sorry, I'm losing my page right here because I'm scatterbrained. Sorry about that. Okay, Zach pulled back gently, letting her hands go. "I've got to go and talk to Slenderman about us. I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to keep us safe from this. I promise." I may have been the person to get us this mess, but I'm going to get it out," Zach told her. Crystal nodded, smiling, and with more enthusiasm. Zach could do it, she thought. Zach smiled, and then turned to climb back. He sat on the ledge, swinging his hair. Looking over his shoulder, he looked back at her. "I'll be back, I promise." Crystal smiled wider. I'll be here waiting for you. I won't get in any trouble, I promise." Zach smiled and then turned and jumped off, then running into the distance. She always wondered how it was that nobody ever saw him, though. Crystal shut the door, locked it, and then walked backwards from the thing, proceeding what just happened. Zach had finally kissed her, and as she raised her hand to touch her lips, she thought to herself it was worth it. It was worth every wait. She didn't know why it had happened to either one of them, but it's clear now that somewhere along the line of all those crazy things that had happened, they had started to feel deeply for each other. And Crystal had so many questions about why, the who, the where, and the what. But this was a good moment, Crystal told herself. "I'll think about it tomorrow, not now. Now I just want to enjoy it a little bit longer." Later that night, Crystal awoke, but she couldn't tell what had woken her. She felt a strange feeling like she was being called. Crystal pulled back her covers to go and got out of the bed. Pulling on her robe, as she did, she felt she was compelled to go to the window. She thought, "Why am I going to the window? Is Zach back?" He couldn't be back so soon. She stood directly in front of the window. Crystal could feel like hands were no longer in control as she watched them pull the curtains back to full view of outside. As Crystal stood there, looking out of the darkness, she still didn't know what it was that had woken her up. As she stared in the darkness, her brain was having trouble perceiving what she was seeing. She didn't remember this side of the house facing the forest, and why were the trees so tall? That was until she kept looking up and saw what appeared to be a white circle floating in the air. As she continued to focus, chill ran down her spine as she realized the floating white orb was a face. It was a faceless man, the Slender Man. The thing that had been mistaken from a tree was his tentacles, starting out angrily. She stood in frozen fear and grabbed thing as buzzing inside her head. "Crystal!" A deep, haunting man's voice sounded as it came from the depths of her mind, the breeze of her mind. Buzzing and buzzing, growing louder and louder, she felt her brain screaming in pain as protest, her mind and the pain become too much, and she couldn't even scream for help, even as she wanted to. Her eyes rolled back of her head, and she fell backwards onto the bedroom floor, unconscious.